Today at the National Press Club, in the midst of the election campaign, Housing Minister and Minister for Homelessness Clare will debate her coalition counterpart Michael Sukkar, the Shadow Minister for Housing and Homelessness. Clare and Michael Sukkar with today's National Press Club address.
Hello and welcome to the National Press Club for today's Westpac address. My name is Tom Connell. I'm the President here at the club as well as Chief Election Analyst and Anchor at Sky News. Today is the housing policy debate with the Minister Clare and the Shadow Minister Michael Sukkar. We appreciate their time, of course, during this busy campaign. Housing has been a big issue this millennium, it's fair to say, and the house price issue, is now morphed into what both sides appear to agree is a crisis. So it is certainly an important debate during this campaign. We have agreed the debate rules. They include 6-minute opening speeches, questions to each other and questions from me and the floor. So I will do my bit to not overly sanitise things, but wade in when I need to, perhaps. We had a coin toss to agree who begins, and therefore the Shadow Minister, you have the floor.
Well, thank you, Tom. 6 months ago when I was here last, I made it clear the Coalition won't accept a situation where a generation of Australians miss out on the opportunities for first home ownership that previous generations enjoyed. However, over the past 3 years, we've witnessed one of the most catastrophic public policy failures in a generation. Under Labor, less houses have been built, with falling housing completions, approvals and first home buyers. On every single metric, housing has gone radically backwards under this government. Yet Labor chose to run the biggest migration program in a generation, with more than 1 million overseas arrivals in just 2 years, whilst building fewer homes. Rents have jumped a massive 18% under Labor, with a family with a typical mortgage $50,000 worse off in higher interest repayments. Labor's prioritised a foreign-owned corporate rental model over home ownership, and it's aligned itself with unions like the CFMEU, which has driven up costs. Labor's promise to build 1.2 million homes over 5 years will never see the light of day, with industry experts predicting a shortfall of not a little bit, but over 400,000 homes short. And despite promising so-called billions in housing investment, Labor is yet to deliver a single newly built home through a policy implemented this term. Yet, with this record of failure, Labor's only new housing announcement during this campaign is their pledge to build 100,000 new homes from another $10 billion fund. That works out to be $100,000 a home. Now, with average new home build costs of around $500,000 in Australia, Labor's either discovered some building formula unknown to every other home builder in this country, or this is just another comical lie from the government. A future coalition government will have a big job ahead of us, there's no doubt. But we will make big strides in addressing Labor's housing crisis. As someone from a migrant family myself, I know why millions choose Australia, but migration must be planned. Our policies will free up over 100,000 homes by significantly reducing the permanent migration program and net overseas migration, capping new international students, particularly at major metro universities, reducing numbers by at least 30,000 a year, implementing a 2-year ban on foreign investors and temporary residents buying existing homes. And it's only the Coalition that has a plan to support first home buyers with the two most critical challenges in purchasing a new home: mortgage serviceability and the deposit hurdle. Under the Coalition, first home buyers of new homes will be able to claim a tax deduction on mortgage interest for the first 5 years after purchasing their home. This is a monumental tilting of the scales in favour of first home buyers. First home buyer mortgage deductibility will mean for a couple on average full-time incomes a $55,000 tax benefit to help meet their mortgage repayments. This will give first home buyers some of their own tax back to help them with their mortgage repayments in what we know are the most critical early years. According to the HIA, it will also mean an additional 30,000 homes are built each year, as this incentive encourages first home buyers to purchase a new apartment or townhouse or detached house, rather than simply fighting it out for the dwindling pool of existing homes. With the deposit hurdle, we know it takes on average 8 years to save for a deposit, and it's well over 10 years in Sydney and Melbourne. Our Super Home Buyer scheme will allow first home buyers to access up to $50,000 of their own super to contribute towards their deposit. This policy offers both home ownership and the protection of super by requiring that to be put in at the end when the property is sold. And we'll continue the Coalition's highly successful home guarantee scheme that we took to the 2019 election and that I put in place as Housing Minister in 2020, which has helped over 200,000 Australians purchase homes with deposits as low as 5% and 2% respectively. To get housing supply moving, and after significant consulting with industry and councils over the last few years, we found a key barrier to housing is the lack of fundamental essential infrastructure. Hundreds of greenfield sites remain underdeveloped due to insufficient infrastructure for water, power, sewerage and roads. Our $5 billion housing infrastructure program will address this gap and accelerate shovel-ready housing. Our program will deliver 500,000 new homes more quickly using grants and concessional loans. We also know that the CFMEU has driven up housing costs. In many cases, productivity in construction is down to less than 3 productive days of work a week. This drives up costs, and those costs are just passed on to everyday Australians. Labor can't stand up to the CFMEU because they've received over $11.5 million in donations and support from that union since Anthony Albanese became Labor leader. We'll reinstate the ABCC and deregister the lawless CFMEU. So the Coalition has a strong plan to restore the dream of home ownership, but to do so we need to be bold. Tinkering around the edges won't meet this challenge. And while Labor seem content with a generation of Australians being forced into remaining lifelong renters, the Coalition again won't accept a generation of Australians missing out on the opportunities for home ownership that previous generations of Australians have enjoyed.
Thank you, Shadow Minister. Minister.
Thank you so much, Tom. Thanks to the Press Club and thanks to all of you in this room and at home for making the time to engage in what I genuinely believe is the biggest social and economic challenge facing our country right now. We've got a housing crisis in our country that's been building now for about 40 years, and this is affecting fundamentally the lives of literally millions of people who live in our country. Now, as Housing Minister, I have the genuine privilege of sitting down with people who are in varying forms of housing distress all around the country. And I want to start by explaining some of what I hear from those people. I talk to couples who are in their 30s, both working, and who have got children who would absolutely have owned their own home in Australia a generation ago, but are today locked out of the market. I spend a lot of time talking to young people about their experience of housing. And I want to tell you the words that they use when they talk to me. They talk about anger, they talk about frustration, they talk about rage. But then there's other young people who have actually moved beyond that, and these are the people I'm most worried about. A generation of young people around our country who are in feelings of despair that they are just never going to face the stable housing proposition that their parents and grandparents got access to. Almost all these people I talk to, especially the young ones, they share a deep belief, which I agree with, that for a long time governments have not been listening to them and not been prioritising the pain that they are in that is caused by their housing situation. Housing is not just about bricks and mortar. This is the foundation on which we provide every Australian and their family the ability to build a good life in our country. We came to office 3 years ago after a decade of abject neglect of housing. This was not some subterfuge withdrawal from housing. Many of you would remember that Tony Abbott and Scott Morrison actually deliberately made a decision to take the Commonwealth out of the discussion. And that's why for most of the almost decade that the Coalition were in power, there wasn't even a Commonwealth Housing Minister. That's how tapped out they were from this problem. Now, out of those ashes, our government has built easily the boldest and most ambitious agenda on housing that a government has had in our country since the post-war period. We're building more homes. 500,000 homes have been built since we've been in government, and this has been helped by government policies such as free TAFE, which has trained 500,000 Australians in areas of skills need for the country. We're working with the states to build 1.2 million homes for Australians. And really importantly, our government is building 55,000 social and affordable homes for people who really need them. As of today, 28,000 of those homes are in planning or under construction. We've worked to get renters a better deal. Throughout the course of our term, we've lifted Commonwealth rent assistance by 45%. That is assisting 1 million households around the country. We've also worked with the states to make sure that we try to improve renters' rights wherever we can. And we've gotten more Australians into home ownership, 150,000 through the 5% deposit program and 40,000 more on the way through our Help to Buy scheme. Now, in this first term, we've laid critical foundations. But in our second term, the Albanese government wants to go further, much further. On Sunday, our Prime Minister announced 2 game-changing reforms that are all about backing in those young people around our country to get into a home of their own. The first is that we are going to offer every young person around the country the chance to get into the housing market with just a 5% deposit, with the government backing you in to do it. We want to put you in a position where you're paying off your own mortgage and not someone else's. And our government is going to work with the states and territories to do something that no Commonwealth government has done before, and that is build 100,000 homes specifically for first home buyers. Now, what we want to make sure is that young people around the country get a clean shot at getting into home ownership without having to compete with property investors or other generations. Now, when you add these things up, this existing agenda that we created in the first term with the things that we want to do in a second term, we're talking here about a $43 billion investment in this problem for our country. $32 billion of that is focused exclusively on building more homes. Now, I want to start by just responding to a couple of things that Michael has said here. And you'll hear this a little bit, I think, from Michael today. He's going to infer that everything that's going wrong in housing today has happened just over the last 3 years. Now, I think everyone in this audience and everyone at home knows that the truth is this is a 40-year-old problem for our country. Just look at the data. It's very clear. He's also talked about his concerns that the government hasn't moved fast enough. And let me be really clear. There is no question that we have achieved more in 3 years than the Commonwealth government did in the preceding 9. There's just absolutely no question about that. The facts make it very clear. But remember, after that 9 years of neglect, the Coalition then have spent the last 3 years trying to hold us up. There would be fewer Australians in housing distress today if they'd actually just worked with us on this problem and let us get critical reforms through the Parliament. Now, Michael's talked a little bit about our national housing targets, suggesting that they're too high. What he's really saying here is that the answer to this problem is lower than national ambition, and low ambition is what got us here. And finally, the overall policy offering from the Liberals. For young people across the country, there is absolutely nothing here for you. All they have is a cocktail of policies that are going to lead to higher house prices and fewer homes for Australians. We want a government in charge of this country that has an ambition that matches the size of the problem, and into this election, that is Labor.
Thank you, Minister. So you spoke about ambition and that $1.2 million target. Your own or the independent National Housing Supply Council says you'll be about 300,000 short. Are you willing to say you're not on track and explain why?
Well, Tom, again, we need a bold and ambitious target because boldness and ambition is exactly what is required here. So instead of washing our hands of the problem, as the former government did, the PM's actually stepped up and engaged with the states to negotiate a shared target across the country of 1.2 million homes. Now, how are we going against that target? I said we've built 500,000 homes since we've been in government. We've got critical policies in train that are helping us get there, things like fee-free TAFE, which Michael and his colleagues want to scrap, things like the planning reform that's occurring at a state level. Now, do we need to do more? Absolutely we do. If this was a simple problem that could be fixed in a 3-year term of a government, it wouldn't be a 40-year-old crisis that's been building for our country. Now, what I do want to say to you, Tom, is that we're making real progress against these targets. Now, Michael's used some numbers there that are a bit old. It's true that some time ago, when we first set this target, the industry said if you continue on this current trajectory, you are going to fall significantly short. The last Master Builders report that came out showed that we've made up 240,000 of the gap just because of the work that we've done. Now, this is something that the government is going to need to continue to work on. But what we're seeing is really positive improvement in the data, and we'll continue to work with states and territories to get there.
So you describe yourself as behind the target, but you hope to make up that gap still with new policies that you've announced.
Well, it's not so much new policies. A lot is coming online here, Tom. You know, some of the things that are holding us back from building at the rate we need, for example, are skill shortages. And that's why we're training so many more Australians in the skills that we need. Planning reforms are an issue, and that's why the PM has worked with the states to make really drastic planning changes to make us get more houses online more quickly. What I would just finish by saying, Tom, is that the answer here, like the Coalition have said, oh, we're just not going to have a target. We'll just build as many homes as we build. I mean, come on. We need a coalescing goal for the nation to rally around, and that is exactly what we're doing.
Well, you're stealing my next question here. This one is for you, Shadow Minister. You have criticised the Labor target. You don't appear to have one. Will you set a target, and will you keep in place the housing planning reform the state signed up to, whether that be reform it in some way, keep it, or will you scrap it?
Well, the problem for Clare and the government is that when you continually say to Australians, who I think have every right to take you at face value, that you're going to deliver 1.2 million homes when you're falling hundreds of thousands of homes short, you're insulting their intelligence. When you tell Australians, as Clare just did then in her remarks, that the Labor government's building more homes, well, that is against every single ABS statistic that every single person in this room could find very easily on their phone. We're building fewer homes after 3 years of the Labor government than the former coalition government, which Clare criticises. So if the former coalition government was so terrible, I wonder how Clare would judge this government, because they're building 30,000 homes a year less. So we're building fewer homes, and yet we have a government putting out a target that they now know they won't meet. They now know they won't meet. Well, we will build more homes than the Labor Party. In the preceding 5 years before this government came to power, Australia built more than 1 million homes. Routinely in Australia, over 5-year periods, in about the last 25 years, we've built more than 1 million homes. We're not on track to build 1 million homes after 5 years of the Labor government, so we've actually gone backwards. We're not even maintaining the status quo of what Australia was building previously, so we're going backwards, and at the same time that we're going backwards, we have a government that's had this genius idea to run a world record migration program, which has driven rents up by nearly 20%. Renters are the biggest casualty of the Big Australia policy from the Labor Party, with 20% increases. So I can assure you, Tom, and I can assure Australians, just like we built more homes in the previous coalition government, we will build more homes than Labor.
But you've said Labor's done terribly, and your past mark is just a bit better than terrible.
Well, no, a couple of hundred homes more is a lot. I mean, 30,000 homes a year is a lot of homes, Tom. That is what the shortfall is under this government. So they're building fewer homes.
So 200,000 more than what are you saying you'll build?
More than the Labor Party, absolutely.
More than they did in this term?
No, more than their trajectory at the moment, which is at least 400,000 homes short. So my point is this.
So you're saying they'll get to 800 out of the 1.2 and you'll get to 1 million?
Well,
is that?
I'm saying we will get to as many as we possibly can, but I'm certain it will be higher than Labor.
Okay.
What I'm not willing to do is insult the intelligence of Australians.
And just quickly on the planning reform.
And put in place a target that I won't be responsible for and Clare won't be responsible for in 10 years' time.
And just quickly on that planning reform with the states, is that something you'll take carriage of, or are you going to scrap that?
No, look, I don't think there's anything wrong with housing ministers at a federal level trying to encourage states to undertake planning and zoning reform. One area where Clare and I will probably agree is that a big part of the problem that we've faced over many decades is the constraints we see at a state level. However, I think it's heroic for federal governments to claim that they're going to go in and reform state laws that are the province and responsibility of state governments.
Okay.
So we'll work with them, absolutely, but I wouldn't want to set an unrealistic expectation, which I fear the Labor government has. I mean, for example, Chris Minns committed to a target and then within 2 months admitted he wouldn't even get halfway towards that target.
Okay.
So it gets back to the point of what's a target worth if you're not going to get anywhere near it?
Quick response, Minister, before we go
Well, I mean, I think what you just heard there is more of the evasion and unwillingness to take any responsibility for this problem that led to 9 years of total neglect of this by the Coalition. And I'd say, you know, the claim that the Liberals are going to build more houses is ridiculous. They don't have any policies that are seriously going to do that. What I can tell you is this weird cocktail of things that the Liberals have dreamed up are going to lead to more expensive homes and fewer homes being built around the country. Why is that the case? Because most of the $32 billion that our government is injecting into building more homes will be scrapped by Michael and his colleagues.
Okay.
What we know is that when you take the policies they have said they will unwind, it will lead to 210,000 fewer homes, and no one can forget in this discussion the dud super for housing policy, which is going to, the evidence suggests, raise house prices by $92,000 around our capital cities and build not a single new home for the country.
Let me get to some of the policies. The supply issue, everybody agrees, is a huge one, in particular workers. So about 2.8% of construction workers are overseas arrivals. That's half the rate of other industries. You're calling it a crisis, not you alone, but you're calling it a crisis. Is it time to make it just as easy to get a construction worker through the skilled migrant system as it is a nurse, for example, and remove barriers such as the local labour test and the $10,000 fee?
Look, Tom, our main priority is always going to be train Australians first for these jobs. So that's why you've seen our government make massive investments in this. Remember, free TAFE that the Coalition say that they want to scrap, 500,000 Australians have trained in new professions through that. About 40,000, sorry, it's actually 600,000 now, and about 40,000 of those people have trained in construction professions. The Prime Minister has also put a proposal in place that gives $10,000 to apprentices that have those skills who come and train in residential construction. We will use the migration system where it's needed. Last year,
Isn't it needed? Quite clearly, there is a shortage. You're saying you won't make it any easier to get construction workers in?
Well, the challenge is not necessarily the ease of bringing construction workers in. We have a demand-driven migration system. About 10,000 construction workers came in through that system last year. I'd expect those numbers to be around the same. But, Tom, we're an Australian government and our focus is making sure that we train Australians for these fantastic jobs. If you're a Sparky, if you're going to build a home, you're probably never going to be out of work in Australia, and we want to support our young people.
But there are barriers in there you could remove, such as a $10,000 fee and a labour market test. You won't consider that?
When the construction professions are on the list of professions that are in shortage in Australia today, Tom, so I don't agree that there are major constraints in the migration system to bring construction workers to Australia. What I will say is that we're a government that's got serious investments and policies on the table to train up Australians. The Coalition don't. Okay.
And Shadow Minister, similar question to you around getting more tradies. Do you think that's part of the situation?
The CFMEU
making it easier. And I just want you, given that you've also got this renewed pledge, I believe, from Peter Dutton to cut the net overseas migration, how is that going to fit in with bringing in more tradies to Australia?
So let's just start with where Clare finished off. The CFMEU will not allow the Labor Party to make the changes that Tom has described. The sorts of changes that would mean we bring in more bricklayers and less yoga instructors, because that's the situation we face at the moment. Where we will agree is I think it is important that we do train a local workforce, which is one of the reasons why we are putting in place an apprentice wage subsidy up to $12,000. But let's be very clear that the CFMEU will not allow the Labor Party to do that. The other problem, sadly, with respect to migration, before I move off it, we make no apologies that we cannot continue to bring in 1 million migrants over 2 years. We cannot continue a migration level at that elevated amount when we're building fewer homes. It's an undisputable fact we are building fewer homes.
You could build more homes.
And so we have to bring down net overseas migration, and only one party will do that, and that's ourselves. Having said that, of course, I think, Tom, you need to reorient the skills list to bring in more of the skills we need in those trades, unencumbered by the CFMEU, who seems to have had a veto right over this government.
So you would make changes to get more construction?
We've made it very clear. We've made it very clear, Tom, that we'll do two things. We're going to drastically reduce migration and reorient that smaller program into the sorts of trades we need to support our local workers.
Minister, you've mentioned again the superannuation policy today. I've seen a previous comment from you, it will increase prices by $92,000. So if giving everybody access to their super at the same time turbocharges that, it increases prices, wouldn't the same thing happen under your recent announcement? Every first home buyer has the ability to buy a house now with a 5% deposit. How much would that increase house prices by?
So, Tom, we've got Treasury advice on the proposal to expand the opportunity for young Australians to get into the market with a 5% deposit that tells us there will not be a significant impact on house prices. So let me tell you why. This is a scheme that has about 50,000 places available in Australia already today. The Treasury advice tells us that we might move to 80,000 people a year roughly accessing that scheme. So we're talking about 30,000 additional buyers. This is in a market where 700,000 property transactions are taking place each year. But let me say that the reason that we can be confident about this is because we have, alongside that commitment, a commitment to build 100,000 homes for first home buyers around the country. So whatever we're doing on the side of trying to help first home buyers in, it needs to be balanced out by bringing new supply onto the market. And that's one of the key differences between Labor and Liberal in this debate. We have a Liberal Party that's got only demand side measures, stoking this and that, raising house prices but not building more homes. We have a different approach. Now, just let me give you the contrast with super for housing. I said 30,000 new home buyers. What Michael and his colleagues are wildly saying is that they are going to give millions of people around our country access to roughly the same amount of superannuation on a single day. So what are we going to have the result of that? What we're going to see is that young people around the country are going to go along to an auction. They're going to bid up against each other, trashing their retirement savings. But because no new houses will be built, they're basically taking and ransacking that generation's retirement savings and they are gifting it to the older property-only generation. Like if I was trying to cook up a way to make this worse, then I would start with super for housing. You know, forget about all the other things the Coalition are saying on housing. This is the thing that is going to make the most impact on the housing market, and it will be a terrible thing for the nation's young people.
Did you want a quick response?
Yeah, I'd love to. Again, the union super funds won't allow the Labor Party to provide first home buyers with an access to a portion of their super. They would not allow it. So it's not even a policy that could even get through the front door of the Labor Party. But what is the counterfactual to what Clare is saying? So the counterfactual is that the answer for young first home buyers is that somehow it improves our housing market if young first home buyers don't have enough for a deposit. That somehow that is assisting the housing market. Young first home buyers under our policy will get access to up to 50,000 or 40% of their super balance. It won't represent the entire deposit, it will represent a portion. It will accelerate it. Clare is saying to this audience and to the Australian people that the average person who's saving for 14 years for a deposit in Sydney or 10 to 12 years in Melbourne is perfectly acceptable. That is essentially what Clare is saying. And she, as with the Labor Party, is beholden to the unions who think that your super money is theirs and that they should control it and that you should be a lifelong renter because Labor is comfortable with people being lifelong renters and we're not.
Okay, one more quick one before I go to my colleagues. Your mortgage deductibility plan, Shadow Minister, so I'm going on the Coalition figures I've read here. 110,000 households will benefit over 4 years, the average benefit $11,000. Your document says it will cost $1.25 billion. In 1 year, it would be $1.21 billion. So is the cost more, is the 11,000 wrong, or is it fewer households?
No, we've never said that the 11,000 is the average. What we've said is 11,000 is for a typical couple. It's a cameo we've used, which I think is
what is the average
one to use. Let me just answer the question. So for a typical couple who are on average full-time earnings, they will save $55,000 over the 5 years. That is a significant benefit for first home buyers. It's going to be, Tom, with respect to costings, it'll be a demand-driven scheme. This won't be capped. We're not going to cap it. We will be delighted if as many Australians as possible are able to avail themselves of the first home buyer mortgage deductibility scheme.
Did it go through the
PBO?
PBO?
We've had many iterations of this policy through the PBO. and with the industry.
This iteration?
We have absolutely, well, we'll announce all of our costings at the right time, Tom.
Okay.
But I can assure you, we want as many young Australians to take up the first home buyer mortgage deductibility measure, because it is not a capped scheme, and importantly, Tom, it's a policy that adds to housing supply. Because one thing that I don't think many Australians are aware of is that in Australia, we don't typically have new homes built unless someone's willing to pre-commit to that home. So whether it's a first home buyer wanting to buy an off-the-plan apartment, whether it's someone willing to put a deposit down on a house and land package, what unlocks that home being built is often a young first home buyer having the confidence and having the financial ability to actually make that purchase. That's what unlocks the home. So the reason, Tom, we want as many Australians as possible to take this up is, yes, we want them to become first home buyers, but they're also going to add to the housing stock of this country, and the HIA expects it to be 30,000 a year.
Going to go...
I just need to jump in on
just
that
15
one, if
seconds
you don't mind, Tom. Just very briefly. I mean, this is what happens in public policy when you do sloppy work that isn't properly looked at. This is dressed up as a housing policy. How can it be a housing policy when it won't build a single new home or get a single person who is renting today into home ownership who wouldn't otherwise be there? What the Liberals have cooked up here is a generational triple whammy for young people around the country. Right. Peter Dutton not only wants you to be paying off your landlord's mortgage, he now wants you to subsidise the mortgage of people who have been able to get into the housing market. And on top of that, they want you to set fire to your superannuation savings to burn up house prices around the country.
First
like, again, what a melange of things that will make the problem.
I must respond to
No, but you actually had your go. You actually had your go.
So what Clare's saying to young Australians is this. Tinkering around the edges is fine. Clare is tinkering around the edges. Fiddling while Rome burns. We make no apologies that our first home buyer mortgage deductibility scheme is a very ambitious tax concession for young first home buyers. And let's be frank, in this country, young Australians bear a disproportionate amount of the personal income tax burden. And so providing them a tax cut, some of their own money back, to be able to afford a home and turn themselves from being a lifelong renter into a homeowner.
Right.
Yep.
We make
Sorry,
Evelyn waiting long enough.
He got two goes. I'm going to have two goes.
Well, then he'll want three and then he'll want four.
I'm not going to let that slide by. The idea that Labor's policy is tinkering around the edges is one of the most patently ridiculous summaries that I've ever seen. Remember, this is a coalition government that sat on their butts and did nothing for a decade. They've spent 3 years trying to pull us back from doing important things. And now they've got a housing policy that's going to build fewer homes that are more expensive. Our party is investing $43 billion in making nation-shaping reform that will genuinely have an impact on this problem.
On that note, Evelyn Manfield from the ABC weighed in.
Thanks, Tom. Evelyn Manfield from ABC News. Minister, you spoke about distress, anger, rage facing young people, but last year when you went on youth radio station Triple J, you said, and I quote, "We're not trying to bring down house prices. That may be the view of young people, but it's not the view of our government." Instead, you insisted that you want sustainable growth. Do you accept that ever-increasing house prices is part of what's causing young people distress in trying to get into home ownership? And define sustainable growth?
Yeah, thank you very much. Really important question. I really appreciate you asking it. Firstly, I just say I genuinely and deeply understand and feel the pressure that young people are under. And I understand why particularly young people, but not just young people, are looking at this problem and thinking that declining house prices is the answer. What I would just say is that we've also got a generation of pretty young people who've come into the market in the last 10 years. Many of them have taken on incredibly large mortgages while interest rates were particularly low. And we don't want, nor is it good for the country, for us to see that generation go into negative equity. So we do need to have a balanced approach here. What we need to do is we need to make sure that we build more housing in our country. And I don't think we've repeated this enough in this discussion. If there's one thing for people to understand at home about what's going on in housing at the moment, it is that for 40 years we have not been building enough homes. So we need to build more homes. And the kind of sleeper issue in all this is about wages growth. We've been through 9 years of a coalition government that told us that low wages growth was a design feature of their economy. and we are trying to change that. So the things that need to happen here for us to address this situation in the long run are about building more homes and making sure that Australian workers are properly paid, and that's the policy objective of our government.
What is sustainable house price growth? What's the number?
I mean, I'm not going to put a number on it, but it's really important that we see wages going up faster and us building more homes, and especially at that affordable end of the market where we're going to see most home buyers come in.
And Shadow Minister, we know Mr Dutton wants house prices to continue to grow as well. What's your number for sustainable house price growth?
Look, I think Clare has copped some unfair criticism because I think it is. It would be quite devastating for a young first home buyer who's owned a home for 1 or 2 or 3 years to suddenly go into negative equity, which is the consequence of what some of the suggestions have been. What I've said very clearly is you absolutely want wages growing more quickly than house prices. There's no doubt about it. But you can have a situation where you have modest house price growth, but you still have wages growth that outpaces it. And what we need to see is a period where wages growth sustainably outpaces housing growth. That's house price growth. That's the only way that you're going to end up in a situation where it's more affordable to own a home. Let's not forget the GFC in 2008, where we saw in the United States significant drops in house prices and the devastating consequences it had on that economy. To be wishing that on our economy, I think, would, in the end, hurt young Australians more than anybody.
Next question from Michael de Percy from The Spectator.
Thanks, Tom. Michael de Percy, The Spectator Australia. My question is about housing choice. The ACT's pursued high-density housing, but the surrounding New South Wales regions are exploding with suburbs. The water's not potable. Many of the villages don't have sewerage. So there seems to be this approach to housing policy in Australia, which is limiting Australians' choice of the type of housing they want to live in. Now, if we don't have the support for that infrastructure, how are you going to avoid the unintended consequence of people rejecting the high-density housing that I understand Labor is pursuing versus the reality of how Australians want to live?
Well, can I just add there? So I agree, Michael. There are issues here with governments trying to mandate the type of home that someone should live in. So whether it's our first home buyer mortgage deductibility scheme, which says that will apply whether you buy an apartment or a townhouse or a home in a greenfield estate, to our housing infrastructure program, which I think has identified this big problem. And that is that at the moment we literally have hundreds of greenfield new estates ready to go. They've got council approval, they've got the requisite state approvals, but there's no way for those developments to go ahead. By our estimation, around at least 500,000 homes that could be done very quickly, because there's no funding for the very basic infrastructure that governments used to routinely fund. Well, we're talking about very basic things here. We're not talking about infrastructure that looks particularly exciting on a media release. We're talking about water, about sewerage, about telecommunications, about roads. These things are currently not being funded at the scale they need, and that disproportionately hurts those greenfield sites. And we know, particularly for new migrants to this country, often when I speak to land developers in Melbourne or Sydney, new Australians are their biggest customers, because the great Australian dream for them, and one of the lures of coming to Australia, was having their own little patch of this country. And so we've definitely had Labor state governments who have basically said, we want everyone in apartments. Now, I think apartments are great for many people, but you've got to give them that choice, Michael. And so our housing infrastructure program will unlock 500,000 of the sorts of homes you're talking about just by funding that routine infrastructure. And we know those homes are often the province, most often, of first home buyers, which is why our entire housing package hangs together. Yes, we're going to give first home buyers more support with their deposit, more support with servicing their loan, but we're also going to give them more housing options by building 500,000 new homes. And we're not going to do what Labor's done and say somehow we can build 100,000 homes at $100,000 a pop. Are you serious? Are there any builders in this room who can tell me if they can build a home for $100,000? I mean, this is why there is so much cynicism about politics and about pledges from all political parties, because people know it just doesn't stack up.
Minister?
Well, Michael, I don't hear any government around the country saying that they're only trying to pursue one kind of housing. I actually think all the states and territories, and indeed the Commonwealth, understand that we need to build more homes around our country and that Australians will have different preferences about the kind of house that they live in. Michael's talked about some communities where clearly greenfields development is what they prefer, and that's why our government is and has invested in infrastructure funding to unlock that housing. I think imitation's a sincerest form of flattery. The infrastructure funding is important, and that's why our government has funded it.
The housing infrastructure facility that you inherited.
Sorry, do you mind if I finish?
Have you taken into account the backlog of infrastructure that actually already exists because of those unintended consequences of housing policy?
That backlog is a lot smaller because of our government's investments in this. Our government created this program to try to roll out infrastructure around the country, and indeed, you probably see I'm at Bonnyrigg and other parts of the country which are developing areas, announcing those monies being rolled out. But can I just say, there's certainly people around the country, people in this room, who would prefer to have more space and live further away from the city. There are lots of young people around the country who would be happy to accept smaller space because they want to live in vibrant areas that have got amenities and cafes and swimming pools that were built 40 years ago and public schools that are all around them. The point is people have got different preferences, and governments shouldn't be choosing we're only going to develop one type of house and not the other. What we need to do is make sure that Australians have got options and choices, and that's what our government's $32 billion of investment in building new homes is providing for people.
Next question, Alan Ramsey from The Nightly.
Hi both. I have a question for each of you. Minister O'Neill, I'll start with you. Just on the $10 billion for 100,000 homes, how will you ensure they are explicitly for first home buyers? And what happens if first home buyers want to sell them in the future? And Mr Sukkar, to you, the average super balance for a 30 to 34-year-old woman is $44,000. 40% of that is $17,600. The median house price in Sydney is currently at about $1.65 million and trending upwards. Even with a 5% deposit, that's $82,500. How will $17,500 make enough of a dent to get those people in the door?
Are you happy if I go first?
Sure.
Or, look, thanks for the question. I think this is where, unfortunately, the scare campaign from the Labor Party falls down. Because on one hand, I've had two forms of criticism from the union-dominated super funds and the Labor Party. They said that we're going to flood the market with all this extra money, and then they've made a simultaneous criticism of our policy that, well, actually, when you look at people's super balances, it's not going to be as monumental as some have suggested it is. That $17,000, you're right, for that person, is not going to fund the entire deposit. But how long does it take the average Australian to save $17,000? To save that money outside of super is going to extend the time it takes for you to get into the home. So we're not suggesting by any means that your entire deposit's going to be funded by your withdrawal from super, but it's going to supplement the savings that you're trying to make outside of super. And we know how hard it is. It's not surprising that it takes 14 years to save for a deposit in Sydney, even with my home guarantee scheme that provides you with the ability to get into a home with a 5% deposit. We know it takes 14 years because by the time you pay your rent, and by the way, your rent's 20% higher now after 3 years of Labor, you've paid your grocery bills, which by the way are 30% higher now under Labor. You pay your energy bills, which are now higher under Labor. They're not $275 cheaper, they're higher now. By the time you do all of that, it's extraordinarily difficult to save $1. So the ability to actually use a portion of your super to supplement the savings you can make, we think makes a huge difference, and that $17,000 will be big. One thing, though, that I think is often unremarked about our policy, we also will require that first home buyers recontribute what they've taken out back in when they sell their property at the end. So they get to use their money when they need it to get into that home, and then they put it back into super at the end, so they get the benefit of that in their retirement. And we know one thing, whether it's the intergenerational report, myriad of reports, if you enter retirement without owning your home, you are in infinitely worse shape than if you do. And so allowing people to use a portion of their super, even $17,000, is going to compress that time it takes to get into a home. And that's why we think it's a really important policy for young first home buyers.
Minister?
Thanks, Tom. And I'll just make a couple of comments and then come to your question. You're asking something really, really important here. I could give an hour-long press club speech about all of the problems with super for housing. One of the ones I haven't mentioned is the terrible gender impacts of this. Sadly, we have a real problem with superannuation balances across the country where women routinely have less amounts in their super. I think the numbers are something like in your late 30s, women are about 30% down on men, and in 50s, it's 45%. So what we know about this policy is not only will it jack up house prices instantly by giving millions of people the ability to ransack their retirement savings, but it's also going to significantly disadvantage women when they're at an auction bidding against a man, and that can't be a good thing, surely, for gender equality across the country. Now, you asked about the government's commitment to build 100,000 homes for first home buyers with the states and territories, and I'd love the opportunity to just explain a little bit more about this scheme. The problem that we're really trying to solve here is that today builders can't build homes at the entry level where young buyers are coming into the market. The cost of building is too high and the paying power of those young people is not enough. So what we're saying is that if we're serious about not just bringing more housing onto the market, but bringing more affordable entry-level properties into the market, then the government's going to have to roll up its sleeves and get involved. So how will we do that? If we win the election, day one task is to sit down with the states and territories and start to make agreements with them about where these homes will be built. We have lots of levers as a government to significantly reduce the cost of builds. Just a very basic and obvious one. For most new builds, the land is about 20% of the cost, and we're talking about a proposal here that will tap into massive amounts of local, state and federal land. Now, we will use our powers as a Commonwealth to assist in building that affordable housing on the proviso that the housing is then sold on to first home buyers only. And I might just mention one more thing.
And when they sell it was the other question though?
Pardon?
When they sell it, that first home buyer?
So we don't have current plans to make any restrictions on young people who purchase these properties and then resell them. Just one thing I would mention to you, we're building on a program that works here. This is a model that is working really well in South Australia. The Prime Minister took us on a tour of one of the sites in South Australia a few days ago with the entire press gallery. The South Australian government is doing really good work here, building affordable entry-level homes that are only available for first home buyers. We're taking that scheme national.
How do you get one? Is it a ballot? Is it a wait list?
So the way it works in South Australia is you register as a first home buyer and then properties are made available for
So you're on a wait list essentially?
Yeah.
And that's how you'd roll it out federally?
Well, we'll make... So, Tom, what's really
options.
important with housing is that we don't reinvent the wheel in every single state and territory. A big part of the proposal here is to work with state developers and work with schemes like this that are in use already. So we'll work with states to set those parameters.
But Clare's going to have to reinvent the wheel because Clare's essentially confirmed and stood by their costing of $100,000 for a home. So you are going to have to reinvent the wheel because on average for a very modest home in this country, it costs $500,000 to build the home. So I don't think you can take anything this government says on face value, particularly when they say, we're going to teach the industry how to reduce the cost of building a home by 80% under their costings. There's no way in the world they're going to build homes for $100,000. Now, if, like me, you were cynical of the government becoming a property developer, what will end up happening is the government will end up being a very inefficient delivery agent of these homes. They will then have a choice. Do we sell them at a loss, which is borne by taxpayers, or do we sell them for a higher price than what the private sector is able to deliver? And then if they do sell them at a loss, which is a cost that taxpayers wear, and there's a benefit to those people, they've said 100,000 homes over 8 years. There's 110,000 first home buyers under this government. There was 170,000 when I was housing minister at its peak. But 110,000, so who on earth gets one of these properties?
Okay, I'm going to
Is it a Willy Wonka sort of golden ticket type of system? Because it's a huge benefit to confer on one person.
Your first interview on this, you said they'd be essentially a bit cheaper than market rate. The Prime Minister says they'd be sold at market rate. Which is it? You can respond to the Shadow Minister,
sure.
But which is it as well?
Let me do that. So the costing for this proposal has been done by Treasury, not cooked up by a bunch of politicians, but by officials in the Treasury. And their view is that 100,000 homes will be built under the policy. I'm not sure if Michael is deliberately misunderstanding me or genuinely not getting it. This is not a proposal where the Commonwealth comes in and funds the entire construction of a new home, because we don't need to do that. What we need to do is make up the gap between an affordable entry-level home being built and a buyer who desperately needs that home. And that's the difference we will make. Now, one thing I'll just mention about this, I'm not sure why Michael's claims on the infrastructure funding are wild. They're going to build a new home for $10,000. But they can't quite seem to get their heads around the fact that our government is not proposing to pay the entire building cost. We're talking about making projects that can't stack up, because this is exactly the kind of intervention that we need when we've got a housing crisis this bad.
Next question, Ron Meisen from the AFR.
Thank you. Ms O'Neill, just a couple of queries around this in relation to how this would work. Where do you envisage the equity element coming into play? Do you envisage that federal taxpayers would have a stake, or you're dealing only with the states and the states will have a stake? And obviously you did talk about bridging the gap there. Does that mean you're basically going to be asking property developers to run at a loss and bridge the gap effectively, so that those first home buyers can then purchase those homes? And Mr Sukkar, I just wanted to ask you, you mentioned earlier the 200,000 homes, 200,000 more than what? You said more than Labor, and then you said you didn't want to have a target because you didn't want to treat people like mugs effectively. I just want to ask you about that, because you at least having a target provides accountability. You can come up here and you can whack Labor as much as you like, because you can say, well, you're not hitting your target. You said you're not going to be around because it's a decade proposition. Well, the 1.2 million homes is by about 2030. So you potentially could be around then. That's not that far away. Why not commit to something that allows the public, the voters, to measure the success of your policy against some kind of benchmark?
Sorry, again, just given it's the last question. I think we have to accept that one of the big reasons why there's been such a diminishing of trust in politicians in this country, and it's something I'm sure Clare reflects on and I reflect on as well, and no one's perfect here, but one of the reasons we've seen that happen is that we have so often governments make commitments for things that they will never be held accountable for ultimately. So here, even though we've got the industry saying you're falling hundreds of thousands of homes short, 300,000, 400,000 homes short, that you're building fewer homes than have been built in the past, the government wants to use the 1.2 figure as a shield to say, well, no, we're ploughing ahead. We're not going to accept that we're building fewer homes and that we're actually going backwards, because we've got this shield that says we're going to steadfastly stick to this, what is a wildly crazy target in this environment, because the numbers just don't stack up. And I think you are treating voters like mugs. We could very easily just pull any figure out, which I suspect is the 1.2 million home figure, where they've just pulled it out of thin air. Because it's not based on any reasoned research out of the industry, I can assure you. They weren't the original target, Ron, was a 1 million home target. The government was told they were going to fall a couple of 100,000 homes short. So what do? Instead of revising their target or coming clean with the Australian public and saying, look, we're going to try our best, but we're probably falling short, they've steadfastly stuck to this line that we're going to deliver 1.2 million homes. They're delivering less homes. Less homes. Now, I know through the housing infrastructure program, through first home buyer mortgage deductibility, both measures which are going to deliver more housing are going to see infinitely more homes built. We have great ambitions for those programs, absolutely huge ambitions, but I'm not going to treat voters and insult their intelligence by plucking wild numbers out of nowhere, which is precisely what the government's done.
We're getting towards the end, so I'll just try to get a little bit more attention to the gong as it goes off towards the end of answers. It's a very much bipartisan issue there. Minister, your questions.
Thank you. Yeah, so just to Michael's comments, I mean, that is the kind of low ambition, low altitude thinking that got us into this mess in the first place. And you've mentioned industry a couple of times there, Michael. Let me be really clear, and the industry have been really public. They are fearsomely supportive of us having a national target and fiercely opposed to the coalition just saying they're going to give up give up on national housing targets around the country. Now, if you're watching this housing debate closely, you will know that this national target is having a serious impact on our housing system here in Australia. That's because we've now got something to rally around and work towards, and we are making progress. Let me just give you one number before I come to your question, Ron. From February to February, we have seen a 26% increase in housing approvals around the country. Construction vacancies are rising, which is a good thing. We need more vacancies in construction so we can attract those workers in, declining, excuse me. These things are having real impact. But what I can just tell you is we're not going to get anywhere if we just sort of throw up our hands in the air and say it's all a bit too hard. We'll just try a few things and see how many homes we get built, which is what the Liberals are saying. And don't forget the 210,000 homes that we have funded or have policy in place to build that the Coalition say they will scrap. Fewer homes, more expensive homes, a recipe for making the housing crisis worse. Now, Ron, to your question about the equity element, so if I just step back for a sec, we've got a commitment to build 100,000 homes for first home buyers, working with the states and territories. Again, this is built off a model that works. So let me just bring you back to Renewal SA, which is the body in South Australia that's building the homes that we're keen to bring online nationally. This is an organisation that actually makes a profit for the South Australian government. So what they do is they will either use state or local land, or they will buy very large tracts of land and they will build developments on the land. So often it will include a share of housing that is just for first home buyers. Then they will build some social and affordable housing on the site, desperately needed around the country. And then they might add market housing into the mix as well. And together, using their powers as a state government, they're able to build affordable housing for people who are coming into the entry-level market. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a picture of what this is going to look like and how we can take this national. This is a really big deal.
All right.
I understand there's a desire in politics to denigrate every new idea, but have a look at what some of the experts are saying. This is something the Commonwealth has never done before, and we believe this type of approach is warranted.
Many follow-ups, but I feel Tom would drag me away. Thank you.
I'll be out of a job. Now, within every politician is a frustrated journalist. You get to tap into that now and ask each other a question. Would you like to go first?
Sure,
Shadow
thank
Minister?
you, Tom. Well, my question to Clare is one that I think a lot of people will be reflecting on today, and that is you're clearly going to fall catastrophically short of your 1.2 million home promise. Your flagship $10 billion Housing Australia Future Fund has not delivered one newly built home in the 3 years you've been in government. There's actually reports in the AFR that the fund may need to be topped up. It's suffered significant losses. How on earth can any Australian believe you when you say from here on that you're going to build 100,000 homes for first home buyers when you failed to deliver on any of the promises you made at the start of this term? And I accept that they were promises made before Clare was Housing Minister, but she has to assume those as the Housing Minister now.
Well, unsurprisingly, I vehemently disagree with that analysis. Let me share again the record of what the government's been able to achieve on housing. After a decade of total neglect, the Liberals were so tapped out they couldn't even be bothered having a housing minister. We've built the boldest and most ambitious agenda on housing that our country has had since the post-war period. Now, the country has built 500,000 homes since we came to government. We've got policies in place to support that growth. You mentioned social and affordable housing. Thank God that's getting a bit of airtime today, because this is one of the missing pieces of the housing debate. We have a chronic national shortage of social and affordable housing around our country. We've got a growing homelessness problem around the country, which is directly related to this. We've got people in severe housing distress. Well, our government's stepping up and doing something about it. We're building 55,000 social and affordable homes. Over the coming 5 years, 28,000 of those homes are in construction or development right now. Now, Michael may denigrate targets. In fact, the Liberals did almost nothing about social and affordable housing when they were in government. Well, you scoff, but let me give you the numbers.
I do scoff.
Let me give you the numbers. You're criticising our government for what you say is not building enough homes. Do you know how many homes the Coalition built, social and affordable, over their almost decade?
More than
373. That is what they added to social and affordable housing stock, 373.
Wrong.
Now, as a minister, as a politician, that doesn't make me happy because it makes a political point. It makes me angry. There are people around our country who need the government's help to have stable housing, and the Liberals built 373 of those homes over a decade. Now, we've got 28,000 homes in development right now. That is a serious number of homes on the pathway to 55,000 around the country. And I just say to Michael, we've got to change the way that the government engages with housing in this country. We're not going to get anywhere in this debate if we put together a bunch of silly policies written on the back of a napkin that are going to build fewer homes for the country that will be more expensive for people that can't get into them. I can absolutely guarantee you, if the Coalition are elected, this concoction is going to make the housing crisis work. We need to change government's approach, and that's what our government is doing.
I just have to fact check that. On social and affordable housing, the vehicle that Clare is using, continuing to use to deliver social and affordable housing is Housing Australia, which I created, along with then Treasurer Scott Morrison. We created the Affordable Housing Bond Aggregator. We put community housing providers at the heart of what the government was doing through social and affordable housing. And to Clare's credit, the government's not changed that. They've continued it. They changed the name, but the organisation is the same. We delivered 13,000 social and affordable homes from the creation of the Affordable Bond Housing Aggregator. I'm sorry, Clare, you are wildly wrong, either deliberately or accidentally.
All right.
But the vehicle that the government is using, they didn't come in and change it.
I'm going to jump in. We are starting to run out of time. Your question to Michael, Clare.
Well, my question is actually on social and affordable housing. I mean, it seems, Michael, that the Liberals didn't just wash their hands of the general housing problem for the country, but also totally failed in the government's obligation to support people in the market who need extra support. Now, surely, I know as Shadow Housing Minister, you're talking to people in housing distress around the country. Just to refresh everyone's memory of the numbers, we're spending $10 billion in the Housing Australia Future Fund, billions of additional dollars. Just on crisis and transitional housing, our government has invested almost 20 times as much as the Coalition did in a decade, and we've done it in 3 years, 20 times. And I want to ask Michael if he's committing a future government to actually supporting the people who are most in need out in the community.
Well, Clare, you've got a problem because you can't even get basic facts right. You're not investing through the Housing Australia Future Fund $10 billion into social and affordable housing. What Clare has done, what the government has done, and granted it predates her time as minister, they have put $10 billion into a fund with the earnings of that fund being invested. So it's reliant on returns out of the Housing Australia Future Fund to fund. So it's not $10 billion to start with. Now, that's a cute little trick that politicians use to try and run up the numbers and make the numbers sound huge, but that's not the case. We see reports in the AFR that potentially that fund is teetering because of what we've seen in equity markets in recent times, because it relies on returns. It's not $10 billion for social and affordable housing. It's the returns on that after you've paid off the debt, because it's $10 billion of borrowed money. So you've got to service the debt on that $10 billion, hope the return's higher than that, and then invest it into social and affordable housing. I expect there will be an almighty mess to clean up if we are successful on the 3rd of May. What we will do, as we did when we were in government, we will put community housing providers at the heart of social and affordable housing. Why? Because we know that for every dollar you give to a CHP, it goes a little bit further than particularly some of the state delivery agencies. But I can assure you, what we've seen from the Labor Party thus far has seen a Housing Australia Future Fund 3 years down the track that has not delivered one home. And that's the record of achievement that, sadly, this government has.
Next question, Jack Quayle from The Australian.
Thanks for your time, both of you, today. I've got two questions. First to you, Minister. Under the have only several thousand houses are under construction, even fewer have been completed since Labor came to government in 2022. Is the government's recent decision to reach for demand-side measures an admission that your record on the supply side is not strong enough to campaign on at the election? And Minister Sukkar, to you, the coalition government has repeatedly bagged the Albanese government for being the worst government since Whitlam. But I've dug into the Prime Minister and Cabinet archives, and I'm looking here at this policy here.
I think I know what's coming.
From it's dated 5th of May 1974, and it's from the Prime Minister, Mr. Whitlam, today said that the Labor scheme for income tax stability on home interest repayments would effectively cut interest rates for home buyers. Why have you reached for the Whitlam government's scheme if it is so bad?
It shows you that there's silver lining to every cloud. I can tell you, I did in my long after we started developing this policy, and we were looking for international examples, and this is used quite often in quite a number of countries in Scandinavia. It's not entirely novel. I did come across that interesting fact. So it just shows there are redeeming features to every government, even the Whitlam government. But let's get back to the fundamentals, Jack. We know there are two big issues for first home buyers. Yes, the deposit hurdle. We're happy that the government's now supportive of the Coalition's home guarantee scheme that provides people with the ability to buy a home with a 5% deposit. But there is the issue of serviceability. How on earth do you service the mortgage? We're here, sponsored by Westpac today. There are banks across this country who will not lend to first home buyers because they cannot service the mortgage after all of their expenses that I detailed earlier. What's the best way to do it? We're not proposing to give them a grant. We're not proposing to take money out of your pocket and put it into somebody else's. We're proposing to give those hard-working young Australians a tax cut of their own that they can use for that second piece of the puzzle, which is servicing that mortgage. For the first 5 years, we know the first 5 years is the toughest time as a first home buyer. And as I said, to go back to that average couple on average full-time earnings, they will be $11,000 a year better off that they will be able to put directly onto their mortgage. Guess what that's going to do, Jack? It's going to enable the banks to take it into account when they're determining whether they actually lend to this borrower or not. And if a bank's not willing to lend to you, you'll never own a home. So it's an important piece of the puzzle. And I'm even, even having the Whitlam comparison, I'm still very passionate about it, as you can tell.
All right. If I can do 1 minute, please.
Absolutely. Jack, I really appreciate your question about social and affordable housing. That's really one of the pieces of this debate that's getting, in my view, massively underreported. In governments all around the world, the government is very involved in housing people who have special needs. And in Australia, we've gone through a 70-year period where governments have retreated from that, and we are turning the tide on that. We're doing it through a commitment to build 55,000 social and affordable homes over the coming 5 years. There are 28,000 of those homes that are under construction or in development right now. Jack, I would love to take you on a tour of some of the house sites that I'm involved with. These are extraordinarily large ventures, many of them, and we're making real progress on it. But I just want to say something quick. There's a lot of focus on the numbers and the timelines, and I very much respect that and appreciate it. But I just want to explain to you what this is all about. Our government is making a generational investment in social and affordable housing. I met a woman in Adelaide last week who is in her later stage of life, a very familiar story. She spent her life raising her children. She then went through a relationship breakdown and ended up in her 60s with no super and no housing. This woman was calling around homelessness organisations before she found her way into a Housing Australia Future Fund home. That has changed her entire life, and not just her life, but the life of her entire family. Her 3 daughters were fretting constantly about what they were going to do about mum. We're going to do that 55,000 more times. That is a very seriously good thing for our country.
David Crowe from the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age.
Thank you, Tom. And I'll keep it quick because it's the same question to both of you, and I'll leave it to Tom to decide who goes first in answering it. We're at the home of scepticism here. We're at the National Press Club of Australia, and I think I've got a sceptical table of working press behind me. The question I've got is about your claims on both sides about how many houses you will build. The maths on the Labor side says that you'll put forward $10 billion. It'll build 100,000 homes. That's basically $100,000 per home. On the Coalition side, the claim is that you'll put $5 billion into infrastructure. That magically builds 500 or unlocks 500,000 homes, which is $10,000 per home. Now, I'll leave it to voters to decide whether $100,000 per home or $10,000 per home is more convincing. But the key question is, for the sceptical journalists here, will you put forward and tell us who told you the number of homes that you'll build under each policy, and will you release the information, whether it's Treasury, the PBO or somebody else, so that we can verify that you'll actually build the homes that you claim?
So I'll take that first, David. It's a good question, and I think it's good to be cynical about these things. What we're proposing with our housing infrastructure program, not that we're building homes, what our fund is going to, and the important word you used, I think quite rightly, David, is unlock. We're going to unlock those homes because at the moment we have projects where there's the approval there, the project stacks up, but there's no funding for the critical infrastructure. Now, if you talk to the HIA, the MBA, the Property Council, the EDIA, who are the real experts here, a rough figure of civil works of about $10,000 a lot to unlock that is a pretty well accepted industry number. Now, as for the modelling, can I assure you, with our housing infrastructure program, which we think is going to unlock 500,000 homes, it's not modelling, David. We have literally met with hundreds of councils. We have the projects, line by line, the number of houses that will be unlocked from that funding. Really well thought through cost of projects.
Okay.
It's a very big spreadsheet, David, and can I say, the 500,000 number, we deliberately chose a conservative figure. It's actually higher than that, but to deal with the cynicism and to build in a little bit of leeway, we've actually been very conservative when we said 500,000.
Minister, 1 minute, please.
Thank you. The Coalition's estimates are totally fanciful, absolutely ridiculous. Like, if it was that easy to fix this problem, we wouldn't be in a 40-year-old crisis. We know that because this is something that the Coalition tried last time they were in office, and David, I'd love for you to go back and have a look at what was achieved through that. They set up a fund of $1 billion that was supposed to fund infrastructure exactly like they described. It built 5,000 homes. There is just no way that these numbers are going to stack up. Now, our numbers come from Treasury, David. This is a policy that we've been working on for a long time with Treasury officials. $10 billion, you've talked about the 100,000. I really want to just explain this as clearly as I can. We're not paying for the entire cost of building a new home. What we're doing is assisting state development agencies and, in some instances, private developers making projects that do not stack up today, stack up. And the reason that the government will intervene is because, in exchange, they will give us those homes for first home buyers at entry-level prices.
Okay.
And I'd say to you again, this is something that's already working in South Australia. We want to build on it and make it national.
In one-word answers, will you both release all the information you told us about just then?
In relation to the housing infrastructure program, we've got lots of councils. We'd have to get their consent because these are their projects. This is not modelling. These are actual projects with actual costings, and there are thousands of projects.
We'll release modelling as it ordinarily occurs, so there'll be a chance for people to talk.
In the election campaign?
Yeah. No, not committing to that, sorry, Tom. We'll just do what we ordinarily do as we come into an election campaign, but Treasury has modelled these numbers and it tells us that 100,000 homes will be built with $10 billion.
All right. Now, we all break promises from time to time. I said you'd have 2 minutes at the end. We've gone a bit over time. I'm sure you can do it in 1 minute. You've got this in you, starting with you, Minister.
Look, I just bring it back to what you've all heard here today. We've got a very genuine and serious problem with housing across our country, which is affecting the lives of millions of people. And we came to office after a decade of the Coalition saying we don't want to have anything to do with this. And I think what you've heard from Michael today is that under a Peter Dutton government, we're going to expect more of the same. This is a policy melange of weird things that were written on the back of a napkin that are going to do two things. They're going to build no new homes around the country from any viable analysis that I've seen. And they're going to make homes more expensive through the ridiculous and dud super for housing policy. Now, all these things together are a recipe for making the housing crisis worse. We offer an alternative, a government that is genuinely serious about taking a running crack at the underlying problems that have led us where we are today. We're going to build more homes. We're going to make sure that renters get a better deal, and we're going to make that hard work happen to get more young people around this country into home ownership. It's going to require some big things and the government to do something different. But I hope you see in our first term we've made real progress here, and we've got a lot more work to do on this in a second term of an Albanese government.
Well, I think this is a sliding door moment for our country. As I said at the beginning, we are in the Coalition not willing to accept a generation of Australians unwilling to buy a home. If you have seen what has occurred over the last 3 years of this Albanese government, rents rising at nearly 20%, never been harder to purchase a home. Essentially, the Labor Party is offering you 3 more years of the same. Their criticism of us is that our ambitions for home ownership are too high. Our first home buyer mortgage deductibility scheme is going to finally give first home buyers the firepower they need to purchase a home. We're going to, through our housing infrastructure program, deliver more homes for those first home buyers. So if you think the status quo is okay, that's really what Labor's offering. The Coalition believes that home ownership is something that every generation of Australians deserve, and that's precisely what we'll deliver if we're given the great honour of being elected.
Okay, we thank you very much for your time during this very busy campaign. We know it's difficult to find a date, so we do appreciate the Press Club coming down. You get, as a thanks, Press Club membership. I gave the Chris Bowen and Ted O'Brien ones to the wrong person, so I'll make sure I get it right today. Ladies and gentlemen, please thank Michael Sukkar and Clare.
Well done.